So welcome everyone. This is our final Stanford Digital Economy Lab lunch seminar of the year. I'm Eric Brynjolfsson, the director of the Digital Economy Lab, and I'm delighted to have Liran Einav, a professor of economics here at Stanford. He's going to be presenting his research on assessing the gains from e-commerce. We welcome questions from all of you. The way to ask questions is through our Slido app. I believe there's a link there on the site. Actually, Christy, can you just confirm the best way for people to ask questions?
Yep, they can go to Slido, sli.do, and our event code is 9002. There's also a QR code on their screen right now.
Okay, so you can use either of those to ask questions, and we'll be queuing up questions during the presentation. I think Liran has said he can take some in the middle, and we'll save some time at the end for broader questions as well. So with that, let me turn it over to Liran. Welcome. We're looking forward to your talk on assessing the gains from e-commerce. Welcome, Liran.
Thanks a lot, Eric. Thanks a lot for having me. Let me just share my slide. So this is the paper I'm going to talk about. It's the first paper that came out of what started about 5 years ago, like Stanford and Visa data collaboration that I'll talk about a bit more kind of in a second. This paper is joined like a long list of co-authors. So one of the main comments we get on this paper is like how many co-authors. So Pete Klenow is my colleague at the economics department. John Levin, many of you know, was my colleague, still my colleague at the economic department, but mostly busy now as dean of the GSB. Ben Klopak and Paul Dolphin were kind of our graduate students. They moved on since, I mean, Paul is now at Uber and Ben is kind of assistant professor at Texas A&M. And Larry Levin and Wayne Best are at Visa. They were very instrumental in getting this collaboration off the ground, less involved in today's collaboration, but really important for us to get this relationship going. And the topic of it is basically our first paper from this was trying to put some numbers on the gains from e-commerce. So let me kind of be more specific about it. But before, let me just lay the land for the next hour. I was planning to spend about 35 minutes on the paper itself, mostly a regular presentation with some kind of natural places in the middle for people to ask questions. Then I was going to spend 10 minutes or so, just more broadly, tell people about sort of the Visa Stanford collaboration. Partly it's kind of interesting, you know, to me at least, to kind of, you know, say what not only this paper is about, but what else kind of people have been doing kind of at Stanford with the Visa kind of data. And partly because I think Visa is reasonably open to expanding this collaboration to more people, not only from economics. So if it's computer science or others, people should feel free to kind of email me later and kind of ask how to kind of, you know, get access and so forth. It's mostly right now covered by Visa Stanford. So if people that are listening in that are not from Stanford, might be interesting for them, but they need a Stanford affiliate to join. But I think it's kind of a useful place kind of to this broad group to advertise this relationship and if people are interested. And then we'll have, like, as Eric said, like about 10 minutes in the end to kind of more broad kind of question Q&A. So let me get going on the paper. So what the paper is doing, so again, I mean, I don't need to tell anyone, sort of e-commerce is rapidly growing in the US, across the world, even before COVID, even more so during COVID. The last data point for the paper is 2017. At that point, we had about 10% of sort of consumption was kind of, you know, e-commerce. And what we wanted to, it's kind of the question for this paper is like, how big is the surplus, so consumer surplus from e-commerce? It's sort of a fuzzy question. I mean, there are so many different ways to define e-commerce, so many different ways to define what the surplus is. So I guess we'll try to provide several sort of numbers. No number would be probably like the right answer, just partly because kind of there are many ways to do this, but also the definition of what exactly the number we're after is going to be vary. But we hope to kind of have some sort of ballpark numbers that are going to kind of, you know, help us understand how important e-commerce is kind of overall. Is it just kind of stealing business from kind of offline stores, or is it sort of creating real values? And once you kind of have a way to kind of measure kind of the value, we are going to try to say something a little bit about, is it equally distributed kind of across geographies and income levels. I think when we started this project, the two narratives that we had in mind, kind of that we thought empirically we'd be able to kind of engage with. One was the story that basically e-commerce is all about convenience. You know, the rich people who are busy, that sort of are too busy to go to the store, now they can actually go to the laptop and kind of, you know, order something on Amazon. So it's more of a convenience story. The other narrative that people have been talking about was the story of kind of, you know, availability, sort of someone who is living in rural Idaho, you know, other than the 3 retail stores that are in nearby. I mean, they just don't have access to kind of what people in San Francisco or New York City kind of might have access to. So now with online, sort of everything is accessible. So you could imagine that actually the real values are for the rural areas that are kind of more isolated. So that's kind of the initial motivation. I think it's, at least based on the result, it's more of the former and not as much of the latter. I don't know if it's surprising or not, but we really try to look for the availability story to show up, and it was really hard to kind of to see much of it. Just at a high level, what we're going to find. So we're going to start by documenting the rise of e-commerce using the Visa data. We are going to split the measurement to kind of 2 distinct parts. The first part, what we are going to call, and we can discuss the terminology, but what we're going to call as the pure convenience gains from shopping online. This is the idea that I can buy the same kind of Gap t-shirt online, or go to, you know, on the computer, or kind of go to the nearest Gap store and buy the same t-shirt offline. And to the extent that this is exactly the same merchant, the same item, you know, we are going to estimate something of the order of like 0.4% of consumption as the value of just the availability, the ability to buy stuff online rather than kind of offline. And then once we expand the definition of the gains to also include the fact that actually when I go online, I might actually not buy exactly the same thing. I might go to a different merchant and buy maybe slightly different things. We are going to kind of write a little bit of a model and end up with like a number which is on the order of like 1% of total consumption. It's again, it sounds 1% is small, but that's 1% of a really, really big denominator. So kind of, it's actually not trivial at all. And just as I said, sort of, we're going to look a little bit at heterogeneity. The gains are going to be increasing in the population density. So it's not the rural places, but actually the more kind of dense population places that are going to have more gains than the rural places. And they're going to basically be bigger for kind of, you know, higher affluence, richer households than kind of the poorer households. So that's kind of the most of the key bottom line. So let me get kind of into details. So as I said, I'll split the talk to kind of three parts. The first part, I'm going to introduce the Visa data, how we measure kind of, you know, online transaction, and give you sort of the basic facts, which are fairly kind of model and econometrics free. Then we'll talk about the estimation of this pure convenience gains, and the final part is going to be kind of introduce kind of a slightly kind of richer model to kind of come up with like the you know, broader gains that include sort of substitution and variety kind of effect. And again, feel free to shoot emails to Eric, shoot questions to Eric, so Eric can stop me. Otherwise, I'll die talking 30 minutes to my colleague.
Yeah, no, doing through the Slido is the best way to do that. And I think I'll wait on this question, but just to see it a little bit, it is interesting and a little counterintuitive that the effects were bigger in the more dense areas as opposed to the rural areas. But I'll wait till you show the results and we can talk about that.
All right, so let me get going on the basic sort of descriptives. So what's the Visa data? So basically, the way you want to think about the Visa data is that like every line that goes into your kind of monthly credit card statement that's the observation in our data. So I would have sort of your kind of, you know, mask card number. I cannot link it directly to you, but sort of I know kind of a card number, so can track the same transaction of the same card over kind of the many years of data. I see sort of the amount that got transacted. I see when it was, like sort of in some sense up to the minute. We're not using this granularity, but in principle, like we see the timing of the transaction. We see something about the card, whether like credit or debit or whether like a gift card and so forth. And then we have a lot of information about the merchant. So if, you know, if we went to sort of say, Safeway kind of, in Midtown. I mean, we'll have the zip code of Safeway and sort of the identity of Safeway, and we can link it to different type of sort of Safeway kind of attributes. And same for other merchants and so forth. In the very recent years, we actually have the exact address, but for the most of this paper, it won't be that relevant. We'll only have the zip, which is kind of almost good enough. And in terms of timeline, the data covers, so this level of data in sort of this amount of granularity and coverage started at about like late 06. So for the purpose of this paper, the first month of data we're going to use is January 07. And when we first wrote the first draft, that we were like early 2018. So December 2017 is the last kind of, we are looking at 11 years of data. And in current papers, we are using more recent data up to kind of 2019, COVID. So this is what we have. Out of this data, we can construct kind of stuff about the card. One thing we can construct is the card location. We basically, we see where we don't, for most of the data, we don't see where the card is, but we see where the card transacts. So we, if we are looking at all the different places that you're swiping your card at, we can construct some sort of like the centroid of all your swipes as a measure of kind of your card location. And the other kind of card construct that we construct that is important is something that we call card affluence or income, which is basically using just, how much money you're spending on the card over the card lifetime on a per month basis to come up with some sort of ordering of sort of, presumably richer households are spending more on their cards than kind of poorer households. For the very recent years, it's not going to be kind of that useful for this 11 years of data, but in 2016 and on, Visa did some sort of matching of card that are in their system with data from one of the credit bureaus, where they kind of match kind of card data to kind of demographics about the cardholders. So we were able to do some sort of cross-validation of both the location using residential address of the cardholder and income level from the credit bureau with our measures, and things have been pretty kind of correlated. So I think it's safe to say that these constructs are kind of doing a decent job. What we don't see, and that's kind of important not only for this project but going forward, it's always like you have this amazing treasure trove of data. People are, wow, you see everything. Well, then you hear like a bunch of stuff we don't see. We would have loved to see, but like we just don't. One, we don't see what you buy. Sort of, when you swipe your card at Safeway and spend $80, all I know that you spent $80. I know nothing about the prices of the items that you bought. I don't know the list of items you bought. All I see is like the total spending that you bought. And one thing to kind of try to get around this kind of data limitation is that, as you'll see kind of later, a lot of our attempts, especially when you're trying to measure kind of consumer surplus, you always try to monetize sort of, utility or come up with like a monetized level to understand how much people are willing to spend. Now you don't see what are the prices they're spending. So it's hard for us to kind of do a regular sort of demand analysis where prices are kind of the key kind of explanatory factor for demand. But instead, what we'll do, we are going to use a lot the idea of distance. If we can locate the card in a given location based on the transaction places that the card is kind of transacting at, and we are going to kind of see the location of the merchant, we are going to utilize a lot the fact that the willingness of consumers to travel longer to buy from a certain merchant as a way to kind of convert kind of willingness to travel to willingness to pay, and that's going to give us the mechanics to kind of be able to monetize the consumption decision into kind of willingness to pay metrics.
How useful is it to look at merchants that have very narrow product lines? Like if you see a transaction at Starbucks, you have a pretty good idea, at least broadly what it is, or at a bicycle shop or something that maybe gives you some indication of the items that's bought.
So everything, in some sense, everything we'll do would be at a lot of the exercises we'll do at the NAICS level, at the sector level. So we'll be comparing coffee shops to coffee shops and grocery store to grocery stores, and not do as much kind of cross-sector stuff for this reason. But even within stuff that, are narrow, I mean, one of the questions that actually we are going to we are exploring in a different paper is to what extent when you go to Starbucks and suppose Starbucks tries to get more, to make more money, is it about getting more customers through the door, or is it to get the coffee guy to buy 7 days a week coffee versus 3 days a week coffee, or is it about, getting the extra bakery item on top of the coffee? And we can talk a little bit about it using what we see, because we see the frequency of transaction, we can see how much we transact, but even with this narrow categories, like it's easy to see sort of variation in the intensive margin. So I don't think we have the perfect clean. Maybe gas station is one place where once you spend, you buy gas, but
Right.
then prices are a key issue, because prices for gas are driving a lot of the variation. But again, that's something that
You'd have to do a deeper dive just for that. Another question, Rita Katila has a question about the representativeness of this. This is Visa transactions. How representative are they? How different are they from American Express or others, and in terms of the population?
Yeah. So let me defer this a little bit. This is for sure an important question. I guess just the quick answer here is that we are going to think, for the purpose of some of the measurement I'll show you in a second, we're going to think about Visa transactions as representative of all the card transactions. So I guess the underlying assumption is that sort of MasterCard and Amex and Discover, Amex and Discover are relatively small, so I'm not that worried about them being different. But the key thing is Visa is about more than 50% of the market of the credit and debit card market. MasterCard is is the second, like maybe 30%, if I remember off the top of my head. For the purpose of measurement, we're going to think of them as similar. It's not perfect, because sometimes, you're going to see, like, say, Amazon and Visa have this partnership. So they prioritize Visa cards on Amazon, when at the time when Costco was only taking Amex cards, suddenly they open up and we have an agreement and they allow Visa cards in those stores. It creates variation in the data. So like, for sure, you're going to have this Visa specific issues here and there. What we are hoping is that if we are doing stuff at an aggregate enough level, this type of noise is going to go out. But I was going to talk a bit about it later, because that's one of the, again, no data is perfect. And that's something we need to keep in mind as we go. The other thing that is going to come up is we are going to look at the time trend in online share. How much are we worried about Visa just expanding their market share, not only card being used more in 2017 than 2007. How much is like Visa's market share within the card use is changing, and something we need to worry about for some of the analysis, not for everything. And one thing we're relying on a little bit, like more details in the paper, so like the Boston Fed is running this survey of payment options. And again, a lot of the stuff I'm saying is not inconsistent with the type of, again, it's a small survey, so it's hard to draw complete conclusions, but a lot of the stuff I'm saying is backed up, or at least not inconsistent with the pattern that this Boston Fed survey is showing up. All right, so that's the data. I should mention all the results have been reviewed to ensure no confidential information about Visa merchant or cardholder are disclosed. All the cards are anonymized, as I said. We can link all the transaction of the same card, but we cannot report specific data on individual cards. And we cannot report specific merchant data. So everything needs to be aggregated across multiple merchants. So if I mention like Starbucks and Amazon and Safeway, this is just as an example for people to have in mind. But even if I knew, I wouldn't be allowed to reveal any merchant specific data in the context of this presentation. Just in general, you like to get you some sense of the size of the data. So these are annual averages, but we offer this 11 years of data we are working with. So in a normal year, we are going to see 380 million active cards that are basically transacting about 36 billion times, and for a value of about $2 trillion in sales dollars. So it's a fairly kind of, massive sort of amount of data. And kind of interestingly, it's about 50-50 debit and credit. So there are three types of credit card transactions. So they're basically the regular credit card, your Visa credit card that you pay once a month. They're like the debit card that you kind of sign, the signature debit, where you go to Safeway and transact, and then sort of instead of kind of putting in your PIN, you're going to kind of basically transact with your debit card as a credit transaction. This is the 45% kind of I'm mentioning here. And then like the other part of transaction that is PIN kind of debit card, where kind of you put in the thing and put in and you put the card in and sort of put in your PIN. These ones are not in the data. These are not getting kind of through the Visa network. They are going through directly kind of between sort of the merchant and the bank. So that's not something that we are covering. So that's kind of the universe of data we are working with. As a share of sort of total economic activity, so two kind of ways to think about the share of the Visa share as a share of consumption or GDP. Both measures are taken from the Bureau of Economic Analysis. What you're seeing that in 2007, the first year of the data, we already, 2007 is already kind of have a fair amount of e-commerce or kind of online activity, and for sure kind of Visa level activity. And they were like about 9% out of GDP and 14% out of total consumption. And the Visa share has been growing kind of over time, to about 14.5% of of GDP and more than 20% of consumption by the end of our observation period. And again, and that's, as I said before, like part of it is just the growth of Visa within credit cards, and part of it is the growth of use of cards kind of relative to other kind of cash and checks and so forth.
Can you say a little bit about how much is each of those? Is it evenly divided between those or how much is the whole category growing?
I would say, so it's about, if I had to kind of decompose this growth, I would say about a third of it is like Visa share within cards, and about 2/3 is kind of overall kind of cards relative to kind of other kind of payments. But again, there are different ways to do it, and now we rely to do any of this, we rely more heavily on this kind of Boston Fed kind of survey, which it's like small survey. I'm a little bit reluctant to kind of put too much kind of granularity into this. So the key thing for the paper is about measuring e-commerce, not measuring Visa overall, and probably the most important variable, which again, kind of maybe I'm over highlighting the imperfection of the data, but it's like we need to figure out what transaction is kind of going online and what transaction is going offline. So how do we measure it within the Visa data? So the one variable that is very cleanly measured in the data is what kind of Visa calls like CP versus CNP. CP means that the card present transaction. This is when sort of someone actually actively swipe the card. CNP is that card not present. That's something when you basically would enter kind of your card number and maybe your kind of your code and sort of the zip code, and as a way to kind of secure that this is like a real payment. So this CP, CNP, these are kind of, we have this data for every transaction, partly because what Visa is a network, it's a credit card network. So they kind of allow kind of the transaction between the merchant and the bank of the merchant and the bank of the consumer who is purchasing something. One of their key services is kind of to do fraud detection for kind of fraudulent transactions. So CP versus CNP, card present versus card not present, that's like a critical sort of information for the fraud detection, in terms of how much kind of to trust or not trust the transaction. The problem is, well, the limitation is a CNP is not necessarily an online transaction. If you have a phone or mail order, that's a CNP transaction. If you have a recurring bill payment, like utility payment or something like that, that's a CNP transaction. And the third category is kind of this kind of ECI, e-commerce indicator, which is the one that we are after. And one of the, so in that sense, if we had perfect data on these, we are fine. We can just define the e-commerce indicator as our kind of measure of an online transaction. A little bit of a tricky part is like a fair amount of these are missing. So we know that it's CNP, but we don't exactly know whether it's kind of phone versus recurring bill versus sort of an e-commerce. So we need to kind of impute these missing values. We did tons of work kind of to understand how these missing values are kind of generated, and ended up with the fairly strong view that most of the variation, whether sort of this e-commerce indicator is reported versus not, depends on the specific merchants and the way the specific merchants are kind of, routing their transactions. So what we ended up is like imputing sort of the missing values to be kind of to follow the same sort of distribution of phone, recurring bill, and e-commerce indicator as sort of, as other kind of merchant within the same sector. So just to give you an example, if you look at airlines, which the vast majority of them are kind of e-commerce transactions, once you see that some airlines just don't report it versus some others do. So kind of we would impute kind of all other airlines to follow similar sort of patterns to kind of other airlines. But if you see sort of a telephone company kind of having a lot of recurring bill payments, but some other telephone company, a lot of missing values, we'll kind of impute for them sort of based on other telephone companies and so forth. So that's the key thing. So in the end of the day, after this imputation, we are going to have for every transaction, we have like an indicator whether it's an e-commerce transaction versus kind of not. So that's the key kind of thing for the e-commerce assessment. To get you some idea out of what we're looking at, so across sectors, you see multiple. Once you see sort of that some sectors like non-storytellers like Amazon, for example, they were already primarily sort of online already in 2007 and kind of a little bit even more kind of in 2017. You see some other sectors like food, they were very low on online share kind of even in 2007 and didn't really get much kind of higher kind of in 2017. But then others like electronics and furniture and clothing have seen sort of a fairly dramatic growth over this kind of decade.
How can just curious, how can a non-store retailer have people buy this? Is there
because they have like well, partly the definition of exactly who falls into this category, but I think the idea is that sort of they are still routing, like Amazon would have like offline stores kind of in very select locations. Apple would have like few Apples, so it's hard to know exactly who falls into this category, but my suspicion is that sort of you could still do some sort of in-person transaction for some of them because they have like a minimal presence sort of offline. But yeah, a lot of it is driven by which the categorization of sort of merchants to kind of sectors is a little bit kind of, it's not perfect. I mean, sometimes you have like a merchant that sells multiple stuff and maybe sort of, the
at the same time, you have shifts between these categories as well as within them.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, the key thing I wanted to basically show here is one, everything is moving up, not surprising. And two, sort of, the different sectors start from very different base levels. Kind of some is like very low and some is very high, kind of in the beginning of our observation period. So we're kind of seeing stuff kind of all over the place. I mean, ideally, we'd have the data going back sort of, 10 years earlier when like everything was zero. We can kind of trace kind of, 0 to 30 and 0 to 80. But reality is that sort of some of them already started at fairly high level in 2007. Then sort of, if we want to ask, okay, that's what's the share of US online share kind of spending. What we're doing here, that's related to the question that came before about sort of the representative of Visa. So if we are going to think about kind of Visa's online share, that's kind of what we see in the data. And then we want to multiply it by the total card spending over total consumption to kind of basically say what's the US online share kind of relative to every consumption level, not only kind of to the credit card kind of consumption level. So this is basically this kind of equation basically assumes that Visa's kind of cards are representative of other card transactions in the economy. And once we construct this, then sort of we see that US online share out of consumption is moving up from 2007 to 17 from about 5% to about 8%. And if we only focus on retail kind of categories, we are going from like 3% to about kind of 5%. So it's something between 50 to 70% increase in online share kind of, over this decade we are studying. And kind of interestingly is sort of if we look at sort of the, by county kind of and ask, what's the online share? This is in a given year in 2016. Well, we are matching kind of card location and income to kind of, and taking into account the amount of kind of spending that is on a card relative to other means, because not everybody have cards in the US even today. Interestingly, sort of you see kind of maybe not super surprising, but somewhat surprising to us, like much greater sort of share of online sort of in the coast, kind of in the blue kind of states, and maybe in some of the rural states over here, and kind of much lower share kind of in the south.
Well, yeah, actually, maybe this is the right time to ask the question. Some of it is a little surprising. It seems to be concentrated. I can't quite tell in more urban places. I think you say that in the paper. You know, I did a paper with Jeffrey Hu I think you know, and who commented on this paper, and Mohammed Rahman, that found the opposite, that found that online, well, not quite the opposite, but it was related, that online had more success when it was further away from physical stores, and that when people live near to physical stores, they're less likely to shop online, especially for products that are available in both locations. So you want to say something about, I mean, I don't know if you're familiar with that other work, or just if you have a hypothesis about why people, I mean, if people aren't buying online and they're not buying offline, how are they buying in these places that are far from physical stores?
Well, I mean, all I can say, like, sort of, we were looking hard, like when we started this project, we were kind of basically, these are the two narratives we want to explore, like, and we were like trying to look in different ways for this availability story to pop up. And it's not that we couldn't find anything, but it was really difficult for anything to pop up relative to the big urban areas, or kind of the ones where you see the rise in kind of online share kind of much greater. Now, again, as I said, I mean, does it mean like we can never kind of have an availability story? No, but you know, at least at this aggregate level of measures, without going into granular sort of items and granular sort of, you know, stores, I think it was like very difficult to find any strong evidence that would make this availability story like a super first order. All right, so let me switch. I mean, I can pose for more questions. I'm kind of running out of time, so maybe anything more, Eric, or should I just keep going?
Yeah, keep going. I mean, there's lots of other questions I think we could ask, but why don't we have you finish the, you know, get back on time, and then there are a number of questions queued up, but let's let you get on time.
Let me try to maybe I'll do so. So I have basically the second part is like to try to measure the pure convincing gains. I'm going to kind of skip a lot of the details and just give you the highlights of the idea of what we are doing, and then sort of, you know, what we are finding. So basically for this exercise, we are basically thinking about we are basically thinking about this thought kind of experiment of basically, I know what I want to buy, I want from which merchant I want to buy it. I'm going to assume, which is not perfectly right, but it's not too far from the truth, that sort of, you know, prices are reasonably similar, kind of online and offline within the same merchant for the same items. So the only question I need to answer myself is, where do I get the stuff that I want to get? Am I getting it kind of online, or am I getting it sort of in the offline store? So that makes it like a binary choice, where sort of one way to think about it, like I would have some utility from going offline, which is some sort of, you know, how attractive is the merchant and some arrow term. And I would have some, sorry, that's the online, or I can get sort of the utility from offline, from brick and mortar, which is basically some offline attractiveness of the same merchant. Could be the same, could be different from the online attractiveness based on sort of, you know, the touch and feel part of going to this merchant and buying stuff at this merchant, and how easy it is to park and so forth. And sort of the key driver here is going to be the distance between the location of the card and the location of the merchant, the nearest location of the merchant. So once you have this, and you kind of think about, do I want to go online or offline for the same item that I plan to buy anyway? It's basically going to be a comparison between the utility of going online versus the utility of going offline. And then kind of the key shifter here is going across consumers would be how far they are from the offline store. So one way to see kind of what's going on here, if you take all the transactions and sort of, you know, for each transaction that is going either online or offline, but we are for this exercise, we are only looking at sort of merchants that are available both online and offline. We are basically asking sort of, you know, for each transaction, let's order them by the distance from between the merchant to the nearest kind of offline location, and ask, you know, for each distance bin, how far are, you know, what's the share of this kind of transaction that are going offline? or that are going online on the y-axis. And what you see here is that basically for people who are really kind of living essentially kind of, very, very nearby the offline stores they were going to kind of potentially buy from, still some of them are buying online, but about 10 or 12%. As they go, as people go farther from the offline store, then the propensity to go offline is getting bigger. And then sort of, if they are really far, that's like, that's in some sense, you're really far away people from a particular location. For those who are like 50 miles away, they are going to basically transact half the time kind of online instead of offline. So the distance does matter a lot in terms of the propensity to switch to online.
Yep.
So that's basically the sample. That's kind of the key variation. And once we kind of put all the fixed effects and stuff like that, I'm skipping a lot of the details. We end up with the result that implies that consumer gains are about 11 mile equivalents per transaction. Again, the measure of price here is in terms of mile. And then if we monetize distance by kind of using the regular kind of stuff that the IRS would use, for example, of like how much would it cost to travel a mile in terms of the time and in terms of the gas and so forth, you can convert this to dollars, which means that the convenience gain per online transaction is $36. And if you do some sort of back of the envelope kind of calculation of like, what share is the $36 relative to the total value of an average kind of transaction, we end up with something which is like 28% in terms of convenience gains. And if we kind of add it up across all the transactions we are observing, we end up with a measure which is about 0.4% of total consumption.
Can you say something about the heterogeneity of that? I mean, people whose time value is higher would be less likely to travel a longer distance, and you have some sense of their income from their transactions.
Right. So we did a little bit of that. So let me defer this. So we did more of this in the context of the second bottom line number, which is going to incorporate substitution too. But we've done some of this a little bit, and then I think the qualitative results are similar. So let me defer this kind of to the end of the next kind of section.
Sure.
Yeah. Now the key. So this is basically what we mean by pure convenience. The idea that sort of you were going to buy the same thing anyway. It's just then kind of this decision whether to buy it online or offline. The key limitation of this is that, well, in many cases, you're not going to buy the same thing anyway. I mean, actually, what you see in the data is that 88% of the spending online is on merchants at which the very same card never transact offline. So kind of once you move from online to offline, if you wanted to buy, I don't know, some electronic device in Radio Shack, if they still exist, you go online, you're probably not going to go to radioshack.com. You're going to go to kind of Amazon or something like that. So kind of you see a lot of sort of, variation in the merchants you buy from online and offline. So that makes you kind of need to sort of, that's too narrow of a definition of consumer gains. We need to somehow account for the substitution between sort of merchants as we go from offline to online. So that kind of leads me to the final part of the presentation, which is basically the estimating the variety gains from e-commerce. Here there would be some equation. Let me just skip it. It's fairly standard sort of standard kind of, trade like macro model, where we basically again, there would be a lot of heroic assumption here for people who are more micro oriented. You're going to think it's a little bit sort of too simplistic. But again, I think part of it's nice to have this treasure trove of data kind of for Visa. But if we want to kind of bring all this data together rather than kind of focus on really specific categories, we need to make some assumptions kind of to make progress. Basically, what we're assuming here is that basically everything is fairly homogeneous. People are maximizing some sort of, composite utility index that captures kind of all the merchants kind of in the country, online and offline. And they have a budget constraint, which is like some access cost. So this is like fixed cost of accessing sort of an extra brick and mortar kind of retailer. This is the fixed cost of accessing an extra kind of online retailer. And these are like the total spending you have in either online or offline. And this needs to be subject to some sort of budget constraint. So merchants are going to be either online or offline or both. But for the most part, we are not allowing any, unlike the first approach, we are not allowing any sort of, choice between I buy the same stuff online or offline. Mostly I'm going to assume that sort of the set of people online are different from the set of merchants available offline. So all of this is about substitution. there would be some sort of love for a variety. So people would be kind of, in the model are going to value sort of buying from more merchants, but the cost here is going to be the fact that sort of accessing an extra merchant is going to be more difficult. You can think about it as, offline, the extra cost would be, driving and finding parking and so forth. And online, maybe it could be sort of, you need to understand the website, you need to put in your credit card numbers kind of again, and so forth. And so sigma is going to be sort of the key parameter that governs kind of the substitution, and eta is going to be the key parameter that governs how fast kind of, what the convex cost by which sort of, accessing an extra merchant is going up. That would guarantee why, that would explain why people in this model that love variety don't basically shop a little bit from every single merchant in the country. You do some math, you basically end up with like sort of this kind of the share of card spending online S0 as basically this ratio, which K is kind of a constant that is a function of the model parameters. And the key thing is that basically kind of, S can rise either because online merchants, if we think about the rise in online share kind of over time, it can be either coming from kind of the relative quality of online merchants getting higher, or because the cost of accessing kind of online merchants getting lower. And that's kind of what the model is going to try to kind of tease out. There are two parameters here that we'll have to calibrate, the convexity of fixed shopping cost and the elasticity of substitution across merchants. To calibrate eta, we are going to basically run simple cross-sectional regression, where we are basically kind of, in terms of intuition, we are using the visa data in a snapshot in a given year, and we're asking sort of, as kind of, for cards that are spending more and more dollars, online, to what extent their extra spending online is driven by sort of their kind of buying from more merchants online, or they're spending more dollars per merchant. And that sort of, this horse race between these two is going to kind of inform kind of the value of eta. And we are finding kind of levels that are about kind of 1.72. I'll show you in a second what it means. The second parameter we are trying to calibrate is sigma, is the level of substitution kind of across merchants online and offline. And the idea here, we are going to use something somewhat related to what we used in the previous kind of part of the paper, where we are taking every card, and we are kind of taking we are basically kind of creating pairs of potential competitors, either two offline competitors or two online competitors, or kind of one offline and one online. And for each pairwise competitors, we are going to basically compute the relative distance from each. So if I live in sort of in Palo Alto, and I need to drive kind of 10 miles to say Costco, and like 7 miles to Walmart, that would mean that sort of, Walmart is three miles closer. So that would be like a point on the 3 mile closer kind of line. And then what we are asking here is basically for each pair that are differentially distant from a given card location, what share of the transactions are kind of happening on the nearer one. Of course, you'd expect that all else equal, sort of, you have more transaction on the closer kind of merchant. But to what extent? It's not surprising at all that sort of this share is declining. Sort of this is the share of transactions that are being spent on the farther away merchant. But whether they kind of flat kind of into distance versus very steep in distance, that's sort of basically an indication for you kind of how fast, kind of how substitutable kind of the merchants are. Kind of if sort of merchants are very substitutable, you should see a very steep sort of decline, because the minute someone is very far away, you'll always go to the nearer person. If sort of you really want the Costco products and kind of Walmart is never a good substitute, then basically regardless of how far away Costco is, that line is going to be very kind of very flat, and that would kind of basically identify for us sigma. So again, I'm skipping the details. We end up with sigma that is somewhere between 4 to 6, depending on offline. So offline substitution is bigger than kind of offline substitution. And then if you put it all together, and I'm kind of rushing a little bit, so our baseline numbers, the baseline number for eta, the baseline number of sigma, and the model says that sort of the overall gain in consumer surplus is about 0.4% of going from 07 to 17. And if we started if we started at 0 to 17, we ended up at the overall value from e-commerce is about 1%. total consumption. Again, we can do some robustness analysis. So this is the range in which this number. So again, it's, the 1.1 is not the perfect number, but sort of, it doesn't move too much, kind of, more than like 20-30% up and down, sort of relative to kind of other kind of values that we were getting through the different assumption about the calibration exercises. So and then going back, Eric, to your question, if you look at by card income, so this is like the income of the income bracket for each card. It's kind of interestingly, we see that sort of the poorer guys are kind of the lowest gainers from e-commerce, going from 0 to 2017, and actually the high income but not the highest income bracket are kind of the ones that are gaining the most. And if you look by population density, the gradient is not as sharp, but you see what you saw in the map a little bit, that sort of the most dense, we split all the counties to 4 quartiles, and sort of the densest quartiles are the one where you see kind of slightly bigger gains than for the kind of less kind of the sparsest kind of quartile. So if I kind of to conclude, sort of,
on that last point there, just briefly, so longer distance was associated with more gains, but more sparse is associated with less gains. Can you kind of reconcile what's going on there?
So there are multiple things going on here. So on one hand, if you look at the people don't like to travel, so I think that's all else equal. Could say, well, if the only thing I care about is travel and otherwise people were the same, then you should see, as you say, like sort of that sort of, if I need to travel longer to go to offline, having online is kind of give me a kind of better gain. So you should see kind of the rural places gaining the most. I guess what we're saying here is that it turns out not to be the dominant factor, because the all else equal part of the sentence is wrong. Like the people who are buying, I guess one way to say it, like the people who are kind of living farthest away from offline retailers, they don't have that much willingness to kind of to buy stuff that tend to be available online. So actually for them, sort of the type of items they're buying is kind of not affected as much by the online availability relative to kind of, the New York City guys that, they might not need to travel that much, but they are, for them, like many more of the items they want to consume that are kind of available online. So it's the comparability of the people that are 40 miles away and 5 miles away that is not, there are other things that are changing kind of as we move kind of, in the geographical space or the density space.
Okay.
Again, they're like the other part to this is like sort of the comparison I showed you before on the distance was primarily driven by within area kind of dimension. Like this comparison is across counties. So in some sense, we are comparing everybody in Idaho to everybody in New York City. You could argue that there might be interesting aspects going on between, like, the person who kind of, lives kind of in sort of in a more dense area, in Idaho versus like less than. So you can do within kind of county variation across where you live. This is where we need to rely much more heavily on our attempt to kind of locate cards, which is probably not perfect. So I think we are much better kind of across regions and sort of within a region where the locations kind of cards is maybe not as clean. So I think they're like for sure more room to kind of use kind of other data sets that probably have like better sort of granularity on the location to kind of, say more about this.
Right.
Again, so just to conclude quickly, sort of the convenience gains are about 1% of visa spending. If, the variety gain are getting us up to 3.6% of visa spending. And if you kind of, try to kind of, do this relative to GDP or total spending, we end up at about 1% of GDP, which is kind of pretty large. And then consumer surplus from e-commerce is larger for, as we said, like for richer counties and for consumers in more dense counties. So this is kind of the paper. Let me spend 2 minutes and then open it up like on the visa collaboration.
Yeah, there are about a dozen questions. I can try.
So let me stop now. Let me stop right here and save the other parts for the private part that you have later.
Okay, so let me see. One question is, just to say a little bit more about your assumption that prices are identical online and offline. I think it relates to these conclusions in particular. Can you, how does that affect your results? And is there anything you can do to try to address that?
How does it affect our results? So in some sense, if you say that for everybody, so if you are willing to assume that prices are always 10% cheaper online for everybody, then we can easily adjust stuff. I don't think it would have dramatic effect, but it would.
I mean, there is some evidence in particular categories there are price differences.
Exactly. So my first point, like, how can we accommodate this? So we can either assume that prices are always cheaper online by some fixed percentage point. Then like an easy kind of hack to the estimate and to the measure. That one I don't think would make a huge difference. But then the problem is like there are some categories where I think the price is the same online and offline is very safe. Like if you think about like clothing, I think many of them, they have such a system of like sort of you can return stuff in the store, you can return stuff online. So I think they're almost like they have to respect sort of the same pricing online and offline because of the different sort of return policies and so forth. On the other hand, there are some categories where I think they're using the online-offline margin as some sort of a price discrimination sort of way to kind of, to offer different prices to people in the store. It's hard to do it at scale because sort of, we can do it for specific merchants, but in the end, it's going to be a bunch of case studies. And I think one of the challenges with this type of papers and with the visa data, on one hand, as I said in the beginning, is on one hand, you really want to kind of take advantage of the fact that I don't need to kind of look only at, we used to have worked with Safeway, like, 10 years ago, I had like a Stanford Safeway collaboration. So we knew a lot about Safeway pricing, but then it was always like difficult to say, okay, how much of the Safeway patterns are kind of, generalizable to Trader Joe's and to kind of, Costco. So I think that in some sense, I would not view our kind of exercise as like a substitute to this kind of very granular case studies. But on the other hand, like you cannot scale up this type of concerns kind of once you're trying to kind of capture many sectors, many locations, and many years. So at some level, I mean, that's the assumption. It's not perfect. For sure, it's not right.
We have a few more questions. I'm going to try and give you some quick questions here, maybe quick answers. I know you only have a few minutes. Well, just on that last point, though, it's a follow-up. I know that some banks within the Visa network offer discounts within categories or within particular, even offline and online, I believe. I mean, do you have that data? So do you know whether you don't see that?
No. So there's again, it's kind of related to what the Visa data is. Visa is the network. They're not the one. So we don't see defaults. We don't see sort of interest rate payments. We don't see all the discounts and the rebates and stuff like that. This is between you and your bank. And so the Visa is just kind of the intermediary in the middle. So they don't see any of this and they don't get the bank to report any of this. So this is not in the data.
Okay. One question, JJ has a question about, just to clarify, you're getting the surplus from the variety of different merchants, but not necessarily product variety.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. And there was one, let me see if I can find it, about well, if I can remember it, it was a question about whether you have data on whether the card penetration is significantly different in urban versus rural areas versus cash transactions and others, and how that interacts with your results.
So the map I showed you, kind of, was the one that we were trying to basically take, accommodate the fact that different counties and different income bins had like different card penetration. So that's the level of granularity where we can get sort of any consistent data of card penetration. So all this stuff was kind of accounting for this. If we have like variation within kind of county and income bin, then we are stuck because it's going to be difficult to kind of.
Okay. And there was a question about the local availability, just following up on that, but also what Sam Guckenheimer calls comfort with high tech. Is there a way to get at that and comfort doing that, and whether or not that may be part of the
that could definitely be part of the story. It's like sort of the easy, you know, that I'm not sure in today's world that the digital divide is as big of a deal in terms of access to the internet and so forth like it used to be. But in general, yeah, that's part of, you know, if you go back to the second, the pure convenience story, like the reason that I might value more kind of the same merchant online versus offline, which was like one of the parameters in the estimation, is basically the idea that maybe sort of it's easier for me to kind of access kind of online, or I'm more comfortable kind of transacting online without the touch and feel part and so on.
Okay, well, we only have a minute or two left, so let me give you a leading question that you can also talk about the relationship, which is you know, in the past year, there's been a big surge, at least in my household, in purchasing online, and I think across the country. So I think your data goes up through 2017. Maybe you can say something about, you know, the relationship and ongoing research using this kind of data and related data.
Yeah, so we've done a lot. So the relationship is about 5 years now. I think Visa has been getting used to academics working with their data. So most of the work is done remotely, sort of. So affiliated Stanford people can, after some paperwork and training and background checks, can get access to Visa servers, get access to this, clear kind of a project, and then kind of work on it, like, you know, in the usual way. It's difficult to merge data from Visa to other data because most of the action is staying on the Visa servers. But people have been working on, like, you know, Ben Klopak's kind of dissertation chapter was on sort of the rise of change. Pete and I have like 2 more projects going on, one on the kind of decomposition of merchant sales to kind of intensive and extensive margin, and a new project on sort of some sort of competition policy, kind of taking advantage of the fact that kind of rare to see sort of the same card transacting across multiple kind of multiple merchants. Typically, you'd have like merchant data, so you know a lot of stuff about what a particular cardholders or member would do on your kind of store, but you have no idea when they don't spend in your store, are they spending this kind of, you know, in other competitors? Are they not spending as much on these items and so forth? So here you have kind of the connection of kind of the same card across kind of stores. So we are going to use this to measure some sort of an overlap of cards across competing merchants as a competition policy type of kind of parameter that might be kind of interesting and easy to get at scale once you have this type of access to this type of data sets.
Great. Well, thank you. Liran, I pointed people to the version of your working paper on Pete Kleinow's website because it's not gated like the NBR one. So I assume that's the most recent one for people to look at. And thank you. This is amazing research, amazing data set, and it sounds like a great research agenda. Thank you so much for joining us today. And thanks to all the participants for coming in. And that's our last lunch seminar for the semester. Hope you enjoyed Thanksgiving and are looking forward to some good holidays in December. And we'll keep you posted on our next seminars in 2021. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Liran.